got your attention now, don't I?
This is the Black Rifle Coffee Podcast. Prepare to get caffeinated.
Well, here's a question, because I've often wondered, from your perspective, because you retired as a 3-star.
2-star.
2-star.
Yeah.
Sorry. I gave you an extra star, right?
Should have been a 5-star. I'm kidding.
But,
yeah.
You fell short.
Yeah, I did.
You were underachiever, I guess.
Yeah, I was. Exactly.
Right? I often wonder from, a general officer's perspective, what you found in your life, because you're a subject matter expert on leadership, like you are, whether you like to admit it or would like to say it or not.
I certainly have a lot of experience.
You have managed and led more people in difficult situations, in combat situations, than 99.9999% of the human population. If you are in a conversation with a guy on a podcast, not withholding anything, what are the traits that make a good leader from your perspective?
Well, and some of these may sound trite or overused, but they're legitimate. First is integrity. And I, when I was younger, I'd say, I want tangible advice. I want, do this.
Right.
Like, principles are better. How you conduct yourself principally dictates on how you react to a certain situation. So first, integrity, because if people don't believe you or trust you, then nothing else happens. No, they won't follow, right? Yeah. So, that's a foundational thing. But I think humility is another thing. Like I started out again as a 17-year-old private. I've never forgot that. I've always never believed that I was better than anyone else. Now I have, as I became a general officer, my responsibilities changed dramatically. The leadership skills that you need as a strategic leader are much different than they were as a squad leader.
Right.
Foundationally the same, principally the same, but different TTPs, right? So humility is another
TTP
one. is tactics, techniques, and procedures, right?
Just for everybody out there.
Yeah. So it's just different approaches to things, basically. So integrity, humility. I think communication is a big one. It's one thing so if we're on the same, if we're a scout sniper team, it's easier to communicate between us, right? If you're a squad leader, you can, it's direct leadership then. It's much different if you're a regimental commander and you've got a regiment. When I commanded the 160th, I got a battalion on the West Coast. I got a battalion on the East Coast. I got a higher headquarters at Fort Bragg. I'm at Fort Campbell with a couple of battalions. How do I get my intent down to Private Hafer, who's an engine mechanic? How do you do that, right? So, and you got to communicate and use different things because some of them will see you once. Or twice in a span of your 2-year command. So I have my own thing, walking the line, and not expecting a private to act like a general or a colonel. Like I'd have guys, sir, why can't we have more beer machines in the barracks, and why can't our girlfriends live with us or whatever, or boyfriends or whatever?
Really good questions. Yeah.
Well, they're private questions.
They don't know. Yeah, right. It's like, why can't my girlfriend live with me in the barracks?
Right.
Like, that's a total private question.
Right. And, but you understand that. And you're saying, okay, well, here's why.
Right.
And then, in the course of that, you communicate, and I'd sit down with them very unassuming. And if they say, hey, what do you think about living in Clarksville, Tennessee? Some of them are like, I hate it here. My wife hates it here. Or we're from Boston, or we're from Los Angeles or Seattle or wherever, Salt Lake City. Well, and I'd say, I said, I get it. It was a culture shock for me, and just have a conversation with them and know that, what they say is important. And I listen to them. and support them. So communication is another thing. And patience is probably the area that I struggle. Somebody asked me once, and what do you struggle with as a leader? Patience, right? And because if I come to you, if I were the CEO of Black Rifle and I say, hey, Evan, I'm thinking about, we should do this. We should get into this part of the industry or this. I'm thinking it through because I don't want to look like a complete ass clown to Evan, right? So I'm wargaming it in my head for weeks, maybe months before I ever bring it to you. But, what I found myself doing is you'd say, well, what about this? And in my mind, I've already thought about that. And this is what I think is going to happen. And I would tend to cut people off. No, I've already thought about that. It's important to let those people work through the problem like you've worked through the problem, right? And to consider all those things. But it's painful. It's painful because it's ground you've already plowed. You've already looked at. But you'll also get different perspective and something that you should thought of that you may, or somebody else would think of something clearly that you didn't think of. So, you got to be patient. The last thing I'd say, and I don't know if it falls into this, certainly doesn't fall into principles, but I have always very much focused on professional development of the people that I work with. Right. I still do it. In the foundation here, we have team building events every quarter. And this civilians is different than the military. But we also have professional development, whether it's understanding stewardship and what we do to be good stewards of the resources we're provided in the foundation, or HR stuff or benefits or whatever. And some of it's leadership stuff. But I think the most satisfaction I've gotten out of my career was not, rolling in hot and thumbing some rockets at some bad guys. I mean,
which is pretty cool.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. But knowing that maybe I positively impact a young troop and they went this way instead of that way. And sometimes, occasionally, I get feedback from guys. Hey, you said this to me and that made a difference. To me, I think being focused, on leader development is another thing. Last thing I'd say is be a team player. And that was a big thing for me. As a regimental commander, I'd see battalion commanders and they're competing with each other, right? To get the top spot for evaluations, which means they're going to get considered for a brigade. But I'd say, hey, look, if you wrap yourself in glory at your peers' expense, I mean, that's not going to be good for you. I want, and I think our Army needs collaborative, cooperative folks. You can be competitive, but, be collaborative. And I always tried to be that way. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but it wasn't as common as I would have thought, right? I mean, I really thought that especially at lieutenant colonel level, battalion commander level, that guys would be like, see the bigger picture. I was always, when I was a regimental commander, like I said, if I had one battalion that was like ace of the base, they were it. And I had 4 other weak sisters because this one was getting ahead at their expense. Am I a successful regimental commander? No. So to me, being a good team player, and that becomes more important the more senior you get. The kiss of death in a promotion board is if someone says, self-serving. I mean, to me, that's probably the worst black mark you could get, other than a ethical issue or something like that.
Yeah, those are really good points. I've often wondered from that level, is it competitive even at what I would say at the 1-star perspective? Are they individually motivated? And is it more political at that point? Or like, how would you define the way that promotions are working from that point? Because it's all kind of, mirrors and haze at that point. I don't even know how a guy gets promoted up into, a 4-star. Like what does it take?
Well, I clearly wasn't a 4-star, so
But you would know way more about it than I would.
I think, so there is politics, but there's politics. A lot of these same these same conditions for getting promoted or metrics are here in Black Rifle Coffee, right? So some of there is politics, but there's always politics. Now,
Sure.
I think your evaluations as a general officer don't mean anything.
They don't.
They don't.
Right.
As after you make 2-star, you don't even get them anymore.
Right.
You don't get them. So your reputation, and I mean, some of it is.
Are you just tapped for the positions? Is that how it works? Like how?
No, there's a process. So so the 4-stars get together in the Army, and they start at, the key 4-stars will say, okay, they'll start at who of the 3-stars do we think should be 4-stars?
Got it.
And then how do we give them the developmental positions to get them?
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then they'll start saying, okay, how are we going to, what jobs do these 3-stars need to go into?
Right.
And then 2-stars and then 1-star. So, and there is there's personal knowledge is allowed at the general office. And it's the same for all the services, I believe. So if, Brigadier General Evan Hafer, hey, I know Evan, I served with him in 19th Group, good guy. I was in combat with him. You have to characterize your service, right? It wasn't like I ran into him at a 7-Eleven kind of thing. It has to be firsthand. It can't be...
Drink beers with me at the Green Beret Club.
Matt Best told me about Evan, and that's how I know him. It's got to be firsthand knowledge. But then they share their perspective, and it goes around. And this is where I served with Evan, Spotlight Ranger, self-serving, not a team player. That's a kiss of death. Right? So there is a deliberate process. Is it perfect? No. Have I seen general officers that got off-ramped at 1-star or 2-star that I think should have went on? And
why do they get off-ramped? Because is it just like a personality?
Maybe, and maybe it's personality who sat that committee or who worked with them. I mean, I think it's just, a lot of it is, there's certainly a skill attribute to getting promoted, but there's also a little bit of luck and timing. Like, were you on a high-profile mission? Did your battalion deploy to combat? Or whatever, brigade or whatever. Did you have something egregious happen in your brigade? That, I mean, you're not maybe culpable. I didn't say, somebody had a friendly fire incident that was particularly egregious, or somebody murdered civilians or something. Okay, so that happened on my watch as a commander. Well, that could end my career. Now, I'm not culpable. I wasn't aware of that act, but I am accountable. So there's a difference. So a commander is responsible for everything his unit does or fails to do. And, and that is another point there is accept responsibility. Because I call in a person for an Article 15 and I'd say, okay, Evan, you're going to step in and we're going to do an Article 15. You can have a lawyer present. You can do whatever you want. Exercise all your legal rights. But understand this. If you did this, and, I value people that accept responsibility because that tells me that they understand that they did something wrong. I'm not saying you're going to get a pass, but if you're guilty, it's going to be much better for you if you accept responsibility than not. So, but back, so that was, sorry about the divergence there, but I think there is a process, and I don't think it's perfect. Like the Army just changed the way they do talent management. Like now it's more of it's a true 360 where
360. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a general officer, we did 360s, but the fault in the system at the time, and they've since corrected it, was so you pick the officers that you want. You have to pick, 3 senior, 3 peers, I can't remember the number, but subordinates, peers, and superiors. But I got to pick. So I'm like, hey, Brigadier General Hafer, when I was a 2-star, I chewed his ass. He didn't like me. I'm not picking him.
No. Yeah.
So I'd pick, Brigadier General Matt Best or Brigadier General Taylor or somebody that I thought was, had a good opinion of me. Really, if you want an unvarnished look, you've got to have a way to take samples from all superiors, peers and subordinates that you can't control. Who does it? Now, you're inevitably going to have somebody that you held accountable or something, and they're going to have a poor opinion of you.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the system, as it matures, you can sort of weed those out and understand that there was something behind that. And the Army's, they're approaching talent management completely different. And I just saw an article, the Navy's adopting certain aspects of that for their promotion system. And they say the amount of, and it was a significant number that were slated for command, and their evaluation said, hey, they're the top of their peer group. I don't want to say this number, but it's somewhere around 30% the deck got restacked.
Oh, wow.
And so to me, that tells me that's a pretty good look, right? A more 360
honest.
look.
Yeah.
Honest look.
Yeah. Or objective. More objective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that it's too soon to tell, but I think what you're going to see is more effective commanders, better morale, less release for cause for unethical, illegal, immoral behavior,
right?
Things like that. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, but to me, and a guy, J.P. McGee, was the first talent management guy that sort of set it up. He's now the CG of the 101st. He used to be in 2nd Ranger Battalion and 1st Ranger Battalion. And we'll see, but I think it's definitely a positive step going to the next level on getting good leaders. Because you're biased, right? You're going to pick.
Sure.
I mean, we all are.
You're always going to be personally biased towards those things.
Right. And a lot of times you promote or select in your own image.
Absolutely. I mean, it's true even when you're building a company and you're selecting people for the company, you're selecting for your own image versus selecting sometimes for the right personality or person and their attribute for the job.
Now, I don't want to say that that's completely wrong, because you have to have people that you're working with that you trust.
Sure.
I mean, and I don't mind having a contrarian in the group. When I say contrarian,
they can be like very detrimental to the culture.
They can be if they're not, but you want somebody candid that has the freedom to disagree with.
Some people just disagree to disagree. Right.
And
that's like a contrarian. Yeah.
A contrarian is not a good description, but someone that's candid and has the moral courage to say, I don't know if we want to go this way with our company.
I think it takes a very special person. Like, I really do. I think it takes a very special person to be objective and critical without sounding like a contrarian too, right? So I've struggled with that with a lot of different personalities in the last 20 years, where people will just disagree to fucking disagree, or they're emotional about something. Yeah. And they don't know why they're angry, and they don't know why they don't want to do it, but then whatever it might be, it could be that they're just tired, or they've got fatigue, or whatever it might be. And they're just I don't like, and they're trying to articulate it in a tactical circumstance. And you're like, you just.
You're thinking at a level above them, right? You're thinking about the good of the company and what's next. But I would also say it takes a special individual to take criticism. Like, when I was a Marine sergeant, I was a reserve sheriff at Whidbey Island, Washington. In fact, I was going to get out and become a sheriff until I realized the pay really sucks and the hours are even worse.
$15 an hour or something. Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah.
Police are underpaid by, school teachers and police, in my opinion. But, I went to this academy thing in Seattle, and I had an instructor say to me, not to me, but to our class, he said, when someone says something that you don't want to hear, the first thing you got to do is distinguish, is it constructive criticism or is it a verbal attack?
Right.
Once you make that determination, then you can react accordingly. If it's a verbal attack, you just dismiss it.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I'm sure, there will be people that have bad things to say about our podcast. That's true. Some of them will be constructive. You should do this. Some of them will just be.
Yeah. And those are, in today's world, right? It's, in constructive criticism is always taken into account, specifically related to this show. If it's a verbal attack, that's just a troll, right? So
so you dismiss it.
You just dismiss it.
You characterize it as that, and you dismiss it. But on the constructive criticism side, it doesn't mean it's easy. So it's
difficult.
It's very difficult because it's your ego, right?
Yeah.
So I had a sergeant major that I respect greatly, that's now retired, a soft guy. And I was, he asked for a VTC with me, and I was a 2-star, and I'd been over to his unit because we were doing gender integration and we were doing some things, and I had gotten with these sergeant majors and senior leaders of this unit, both men and women, and had a sort of a round table thing to talk about it. And I said something, and in my mind, I was saying it to make a point. We had the 160th had been a boys' club just like everything else for years, right? So at the tactical level, it was all males, and we were integrating. And I was making a point to try to describe that it's hard to integrate, right? We had to go through the team rooms and say, that's inappropriate, that's inappropriate, that's inappropriate. And one of the things that was inappropriate that we had pulled out, I described it. And a few people were offended by that. They didn't say anything to me, but this sergeant major called me and he said, I'll never forget. And I hope he hears this because I've always been indebted to him for this. But he said, hey, sir, do you mind if I put on the hat of being your sergeant major for a couple minutes? I said, no, it'd be great. And he said, hey, this didn't go well. They thought the way you described this was inappropriate, and they felt like you weren't supportive of this policy, which is not true. I was supportive of it. And I said, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I came across, and it hurt my feelings, to be honest with you. I mean, I thought, I felt bad. I wasn't angry with him. I just felt disappointed in myself and misunderstood.
Right.
But, I guess the word is processing it. So I stepped back from it. When somebody tells me something or gives me some criticism, I spend a lot of time thinking about it. More time than I do spend, certainly more time than I spend thinking about a compliment.
Right.
And I went back to that sergeant major later and said, hey, I really appreciate you having the moral courage to tell me that. And really the things that I needed to hear the most to be a better man, a better husband, a better father, a better leader were the things I wanted to hear the least. Right. And so I valued that. It was important to me to make sure that I went back to him and reinforced it. Hey, you did the right thing. You were helpful to me. And maybe you made our Army a little bit better by doing that.
Well, I think those people that are listening to that, you can think about that in twofold, which is, if you're managing and leading people, being able to take in criticism in a very professional and dignified way. It's that is a skill, and it goes back to one of your principles, which is communication.
Right.
So you can feed that back in. I think as a subordinate that works for a manager or a leader, you also have to be able to refine your pitch and your approach to how you give somebody criticism. But it will also, if you've done your best to give somebody criticism in a very professional way, and that leader or manager is not willing or able to process it in a professional way, you can find out a lot about that leader too, because what is it? Marcus Aurelius, ego is the obstacle, or it's partially quoting things, but your ego interferes with individual evolution, both professionally and individually. And killing that thing, like doing your best to slay it on a regular, which would go back to your humility or being humble. Like I can't tell you how many times I've run into leaders and managers, and to include myself in the context of like, I have to continue to beat that thing down, because now I'm in a position where we've got 700 employees. Nobody wants to fucking tell me.
No.
They don't want to tell me hard news ever.
No.
Because one, they don't know me well enough to understand that I'm probably going to be able to absorb that. Or two, they also don't want to disagree, because disagreeing with me could, in their minds, could be the death knell of their professional development, professional career. Yeah,
right.
And two, I think they weigh too much in the context of like, you're as a leader or a manager, people think that you know everything. Like, so I've had this example multiple times where, and I get this question a lot from a lot of different business owners, especially vets that have transitioned into business and they're trying to develop and grow their companies. And they ask me like, how are you doing it? I'm like, I'm not the best at this by any stretch of the imagination. No. I'm not even close to this. But the one thing I will say is like empathy, being able to care not only about your company, but the people that work within the company. Like, you can't fake that shit.
No, you can't. People see right through it.
They see right through it. If you don't like spending time with people, it doesn't matter what, McKinsey podcast you listen to or what Harvard Business School study you read, you can't fake it. If you don't want to grow and mentor people, it's going to be very difficult because it's going to make your compounding problem even worse because you need people, you need teams, you need goals, you need a mission. You want to be passionate about leading people and pushing them across a line and finishing tasks. Like you need people. Right. And if you're an asshole, that house of cards is going to come like falling in on you eventually. You might be able to fake the funk for a while, but eventually that stuff comes tumbling in. I think the military at times, could be wrong, you can totally disagree with me, it provides an infrastructure of support that allows some inauthentic leadership to move forward and advance because they understand the system. Like if they work within the confines of the system, they can continue to be promoted and put into different roles and responsibilities while being more career-driven than they are mission-driven. I'm not saying that's true across the military. No. I'm saying
no. I get your point. I think, but I would a couple of thoughts on that. I think that's the same in any large bureaucratic organization. You're going to have the same thing.
Yep.
So you've got folks that project well up and out, that their focus is up and out. Like, like if I'm working for you, is the Clay Hutmacher that deals with CEO of Hafer the same person that deals with my teammate to my left or right or the subordinates that work for me? I've seen a lot of cases where you have almost 3 different personalities. You have that personality that's up and out, pandering to their superior. You have, and as a different person to their peers. Maybe they're not a team player, they're, out for themselves, and then they're potentially a different personality down, more toxic.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
And so, I think that any evaluation system, that's, you're susceptible to that. The Army will redo their officer evaluation report about and I think the other services probably follow suit. I can't say for sure, because you start to work the system, right? I mean, you start understanding how, and that's why I think this new talent management thing with a true 360, I'm sure, it's a journey, not a destination, but now you're actually getting a more, objective is, I don't think you're ever going to get fully objective, but more objective of that leader and his or her skills. And I applaud that. I was skeptical of it, to be honest with you. I'm like, wait a minute, this person has gotten officer evaluation reports for the last 20 years to get to colonel, and now we're going to hang all that into balance. And these are all different leaders that are giving them those evaluations. So, you start theoretically with a blank slate every time you move to a new duty station.
Right.
Because nobody gets to look at your officer evaluation reports or NCO evaluation reports from the last one. Now, your reputation may follow you for sure, but not your evaluation. But, I said, wow, we're going to hang all of those, all these different looks from all these different leaders, and we're going to base it on what happens in their 360 or their interview. And I was skeptical, to be honest with you. I was very skeptical, but I think I was wrong. And I think that, what I'm hearing from guys that are active and gals that are active is it's a good system. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we had, and we're getting better leaders out the other end. So you're right. I mean, how do you, how the people that are dealing with you when you walk around, they're going to have a different face. They're going to have, hey, here's the boss.
Right.
So how do you really get to where the rubber meets the road? And I think you got to be disarming and you've got to be present.
Well, I think for me, I'm in a different circumstance, right? Because I don't have professional peers, I have subordinates.
Right.
And that puts me into a really hard situation because I can't even get legitimate peer feedback other than when it comes to like Jared or Matt.
Right.
Because they're more peer than they are subordinate. But you struggle, and especially as the company gets bigger, you struggle for legitimate feedback. I'm a huge believer in 360.
It's the truth.
My wife probably gives me the most constructive feedback where she's like, "You're an asshole."
And that's hard to hear, right? Even from your wife.
I've heard it so much. It's getting easier. It's getting easier and easier used to say every day.
She'd say, "Hey, everybody kisses your ass all day at work. I'm here to keep it real, babe." And tell you. And we have this conversation all the time. I mean, she says a lot of things that I don't want to hear.
Right.
But 90%, not everything, but 90% of the time, she's right.
Mm-hmm.
One point I wanted to make is you said, well, if you're an asshole. So I think you got to distinguish between high standards. You want to there's nothing wrong with having high standards. In fact, I think the best organizations are organizations that are standards based.
Of course.
Like here's the standard.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And you got to meet that. It's, and you can still make hard decisions like, Evan, you're not meeting the standard. I got to let you go. And not everybody's going to take that well. Most won't. But if you're still got the organization in mind, and if you're transparent when you make that decision and you're honest, most people shy away from those situations. Like, hey,
it's so interesting because you point this out. I don't quite understand why people are so reluctant to have honest and transparent conversations with subordinates and peers. I've seen this cycle of, and I used to look at it and I have a much greater understanding of it now. But when I worked at the agency, that used to drive me fucking crazy because a person wouldn't have a hard conversation with you, but they would turn around the corner and they would say the things that they wanted to tell you about your professional behavior to somebody else.
Right.
And that was just like the act of cowardice that was just completely unacceptable to me. And then when you call them, you like step in front of them and go, please tell me what it is that is going to make me better at my job. Because you told so-and-so over here. Why not you just tell me now? I didn't say anything. And I've seen that that behavior, that's an innate human behavior for some reason.
You hit the nail on the head. People I don't like to go. No, but if I've got my daily schedule here, and I'm like, well, at 2:00, I've got to have a hard conversation with Evan. I'm not looking forward to that. Ooh,
no.
Yay.
Nobody looks forward to that.
No, but you've got to, as a leader, you've got to mature and you've to the point where you're willing to have those because you're doing the individual a disservice by not having that. You're doing the organization a disservice by that. And by not having that conversation. But you've got to you can also, I think, have it and maintain credibility with like, hey, I found that when I'm having a hard conversation, so if I'm counseling you and I say, okay, let's say it's, you're doing unacceptable stuff at work.
Sure.
Your productivity's down. You're being specific when you talk to them and say, not saying, hey, Evan, you always do this. Well, that's a very generality. Statement. I say, hey, Evan, on November 17th, you were late. On November 15th, you were late again. November 13th, you yelled at one of your peers and you did this. And you can tell, and whatever it is, whatever behavior it is, if you can document it. And I don't mean document in a CYA perspective, but now it's harder for you or me to say, I don't always do that. He said that. That's not true.
Yeah.
But when I say, did this happen on this date, and now I think it lends itself to a more candid, productive conversation. And you can say, look, my objective here is not to tear you down, Evan. It's to let you know about this. I don't want there to be any surprises down the road. These are things you have to correct.
Mm-hmm.
You have to come to work on time. I need you to be a good team player because it takes a team to put out our product, a quality product. And it's not a zero-sum game, right? I don't get ahead at your expense kind of thing. But so it is technique, and I'm not an expert. The one thing I would tell you about that I've learned about being in leadership is there are no leadership experts. You may be more proficient than others based on experience and positions that you've held. But I went to take over the Special Ops Warrior Foundation. It was 16 people, and I remember I'm doing a crossover with Vice Admiral Joe McGuire, and I didn't even know how many people were in it. I said, well, how many people are in here? He said, 16. And I remember in my head, that's exactly what I said. 16? How hard could that be? Well, it's 16. It's a different culture.
Different culture.
You know, you have to treat them different.
Yeah.
There's different legalities, different regulations. And I've grown as a leader because I'm in a new environment. I'm in the business world now, in the corporate world. I've been in I'm on several boards, right, on the side. I'm allowed to do that. A completely different type of leadership in a corporate board than it is.
Completely different.
Right. And so to me, I do think, you know, that it is, you're never going to get away from people avoiding hard conversations. But that has to be a key part of your professional development of your subordinates. And you've got to incentivize that. You've got to value that. So when you value that as a CEO, because McChrystal said, when McChrystal took over JSOC, he made a statement, you know, and I know, McChrystal's, you know, he's got different political views than me, certainly in a lot of areas, but I respect the hell out of him. I work for him.
Like everybody like on the show too, I think they don't really care.
Right.
In that context, it's like McChrystal he had a lot of great professional attributes. I don't give a shit what his politics
driven,
was.
Led by example.
Okay.
And, you know, when he changed command for JSOC,
right.
You know, it was a very short, except, you know, the incoming guy doesn't get to talk really.
Right.
But all he said was, before he hopped off the stage and sat with his wife, as he said, don't make me to be the first asshole in the chain of command. And what he meant by that, or what I believe he meant by that, is don't push hard decisions.
Right.
Like I'd see like an award.
Oh, yeah. Manage up.
Like, hey, Sergeant Hafer wants to put himself in for thinks he should get a Silver Star. Now, I don't think he deserves a Silver Star, but I'm gonna like, okay, I want to be Evan's friend, so I'm going to put him in for a Silver Star and put that burden
on somebody else.
Yeah, you got to look.
I see a lot of that too. I've seen a lot of that too. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I tell guys, hey, if I see that you're pushing these things up, then I mean, you're telling me something. You've got a gap as a leader, right? And that you've got to be able to make the hard calls. I mean, it's okay to have a discussion with me about it. Hey, we were on this objective. These are the things that happened. Evan frankly thinks that he should have a Silver Star. Now that tells me something when a guy's putting himself in for his own award. But let's say, you know, I want to have a conversation with you, sir, about it, or ma'am, before I write this award. Here's what happened. Here's where his or her actions during this engagement. What do you think? You know, other than like, well, I don't really think he deserves it or she deserves it, but I'm not willing to tell him no, and I'm going to push it up. Now, I say all that. That's very critical of first-line leaders, but I believe that I didn't do well as a platoon leader. I had Cliff Walcott, who was killed in Somalia. Donovan Briley was in my platoon. Mike Durant was in my platoon. And we went through Panama together. We were in Desert Storm together. And we got close. I was a platoon leader for a long time. And I lost objectivity, right? I mean, I think I got too friendly. There is something to be said about having a professional, and I'm not saying that you're a cold-hearted, aloof son of a bitch. What I'm saying is that you've got to retain the objectivity to make the right call. If somebody's not meeting the standard, and that gets harder the longer you know one, and you're deployed with these guys. Bear, your friend. I mean,
yeah, you're friends,
right? So I'm not saying that I'm condemning anyone or criticizing them. I'm saying understand that's going to happen, and how do you learn from that and try to retain some objectivity, which is your role as a leader.
And human beings are complex, right? They've got, in what we're doing compared to human, being human is very complex. A mission is fairly simple. It can be very difficult, but compared to the human psychological and physical circumstance, it's not complex. Like, taking a compound is not as complex as the 75 guys and their combined psychology and physical circumstance. It's just not. So it's simplifying, human beings, it's psychological and physical circumstance, manifesting it in a tactical or in TTPs in order to accomplish a goal or an objective, right? It's right. Fucking, when we look at it from that perspective, because humans are so complex and distilling it down to something that might be very simple, in some ways that even creates more frustration for people because they're like, this is so simple. You mean all I have to do is carry the saw and fucking hump it up that hill?
Yeah. It's all the stuff that came behind that.
Yeah.
Well, you asked me attributes, and one thing I was trying, it was on in my brain housing group, but I couldn't pull it up, was consistency.
Right.
That's another thing is, when you walk into your boss's office, you should know how he or she's going to react on a given issue because they're consistent. This is what their values are. Have you ever had a leader where you never know what you're going to get? You walk in there, you'll have something like, hey,
schizophrenic or whatever.
Exactly right in front of the company headquarters, and they lose their mind.
Yeah. Or,
hey, we came in and we just crashed an aircraft and, oh, that's okay. Everything's cool. We'll listen. Right. Mistakes happen. So I think leadership is the toughest task that I've yet to master. It's not like it's physically hard or mentally hard every moment of every day, but to be an effective leader consistently over time is difficult.
Very difficult.
And it really is a journey and not a destination, right?
You're exactly right. I'm 44. I would never classify myself as a subject matter expert in the subject whatsoever. I'm continuing to be a student because
exactly.
You see people, and there's always something to learn in reference to this. And I always feel like I'm always coming up short. Like I'm never, wow, I've crossed the finish line. I got a trophy on this, right? It's like I'm never there. I'm always going to be, in the middle of the pack or whatever, as we talk about, spending time with people in the company or people in the regiment or whomever it was as a commander, like there's 700 people here.
Yeah.
Like it's impossible for me. I can't.
And you've got other responsibilities. Yeah.
I got, family and,
life balance, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So, I get the question, and I try to put this in frame of reference for other vets that are out there trying to make a good transition, get into the professional work environment or start a business, whatever it might be. Leadership is one of those things that it is a skill that you're never going to master. And one of the biggest things you can do is just get in the trenches with people and look at people and how they manage and lead and quite literally OJT and go, oh wow, that's great. Like, oh, man, I learned so much from Clay in this. You know what? Wonder who else Clay knows that I can talk to, and then start asking them questions. Then they're going to recommend books, and they're going to recommend, TED Talks or whatever it might be. Right? It puts you in this weird, I would say, educational evolution where you're constantly trying to become better at something that you're never going to be great at.
You're exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is, don't underestimate the value or the lessons that you learn from bad leaders.
Oh yeah,
right.
You're right.
So
you're right.
I've been
you're right.
with some horrible leaders that were. I mean, I don't understand how they got past private or, and sadly I've seen them at all levels of my career. But as painful as that is. And when you're in that place, it's not a good place, right? Your morale's down. But when you get on the backside of working for that bad leader, you come away with, I will never do that. It's like, when your dad or parents did something to you.
You're like, I'm never going to do that.
I'm never going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do think you get a lot of valuable lessons from those bad leaders. Like, hey, I will not do that. And don't confuse popularity with being a good leader.
Right.
Though, have you ever seen the guy that wants to be, or gal that wants to be everybody's friend they inevitably, what my observation has been, they're not successful as leaders.
Successful because
they're not respected.
They're not respected. They can't have difficult conversations with people, which is part of the job.
Which is a critical part of the job.
It's a critical part of the job. Where if you can't have difficult conversations that are fact-based, because that was the other thing that you touched on, which is when you're speaking in generalities, and you're not being very specific, and you're being facts-based, and you're trying to be as objective and the least emotional as possible in these conversations, where you have to say, these are the reasons why I think you're falling short. These are the reasons. These are the things that I think you can do in order to fix your professional behavior, whatever that might be. And here's the other key to that I continue to talk to business owners about, which is it's okay for you to have a perspective as to how the person wants the person and their personality interacts within your company, because it's ultimately your island. You get to choose how people behave. You get to build the culture.
Right.
And I think a lot of people find themselves in circumstances where they're trying to recreate the culture from maybe, a military or something like that, which might not be a personal or personality fit for them. Like, it's going to be easier for you. If you start building your culture, and it's not a cult of personality, it's the culture of the company around the type of communication style that you want.
Values. All that stuff.
It's going to be easier for you, right? It's going to be easier because you can also say, you didn't exemplify one of the values of my company. You might be professionally qualified and you might be carrying
it's an
skills.
Intangible, but still relevant.
Correct. Very relevant.
Have you ever heard that term that culture eats strategy for lunch? So I've heard that several times over my career, and it's absolutely true.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and organizational culture is enduring.
Right.
So long after Evan Hafer's retired and was sitting on his front porch and can't even remember his own first name.
Right.
The culture that you've established in Black Rifle it may have subtly evolved, but it's going to be essentially the same.
Right.
I look back at the company that I was at in the 160th. There were two companies, C&D company, both Black Hawk companies, both distinctly different personalities.
Right. Really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And one of them was sort of boring. That was my company. The other one was a little more lively, is what I'll say. But my point is, the faces that were there when I was there are long since gone. They're long since retired. But when I came back, because I was gone for a long time, I left as a lieutenant after Desert Storm. I went to AFSOC. I did some other assignments. I came back as the executive officer of the battalion. But what my observation was, the faces were all different. There was not a single face in that organization, those two organizations, was there when I was there.
Right.
But the cultures were almost exactly the same.
Really?
Yeah. And so to me, that was interesting, right?
Yeah,
Culture endures, right? Because, and I think my layman's theory on that is, okay, when Evan was the CEO, I came in under Evan.
Right.
And I learned from Evan.
Right.
And so then I carry that and I share what I learned from Evan with who's going to follow me.
Right.
And that's my theory of why this organizational culture endures. Now, I think that's the logic behind when you see somebody acquires a company and they'll come in and they're going to assimilate this smaller acquisition into the broader organizational culture. Well, and this is something I've learned since I've been out on boards and in the corporate world, is a lot of organizations will come in and they'll just decapitate all the leadership.
All of it. Yep.
Right. And they put in their own people. And it sounds pretty draconian, but I mean, it's not like they get a good severance package, I'm sure. But if you think about it, that makes in one way that makes sense, because if you wanted to assimilate and take on the culture,
you have to replace the leadership.
You do. They have to be bought into the larger
the mission.
Culture.
Yeah, the culture. Yeah, you're right.
And organizations take on. My experience has been that organizations take on the values and the priorities of their leadership. When I walk into an organization, when I walk around, even if I don't, the commander, he or she is gone and they're not there that day as a general officer, I could quickly figure out, because I always say, hey, I want to have lunch with the young troops. And then I want to have, a meeting with the NCOs, and I want to have a meeting in aviation with the warrant officers and then the commission. And in the span of all those meetings, whether it takes a half a day, because as a general, nobody lets you walk around unsupervised.
Right.
I mean,
I
could get away with it as a lieutenant colonel. I couldn't get away with it as a general. I mean, people's head pops off their shoulders and you do that. But you can get an idea of the culture of that organization. And I'd be like, I can't put my finger on it quite yet, but there's something going on here, right? There's something that we may have a toxic leader here.
Something broken. You can feel it.
Something broken.
You can feel it.
Yeah, and it may take, but then that tells me, hey, you got to focus another more time on that particular organization to figure out what it was. Hey, another point I just thought of, we do, I don't know if you've ever done it, but I've done McChrystal was a big guy to do staff rides at Gettysburg, and I'm a big fan of it, right? So the Army War College will lead, they have a foundation that will lead corporate trips up there. And there was this one colonel, and I can't remember his name, but he was later in life, he was the first guy to successfully use the temporary insanity defense. I think he killed his wife or something when she cheated on him, and he went to court. This is back, in the 1800s.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay, but my point is Grant, this colonel, Grant didn't like this guy. And, and looking at this instructor, this guy leading the staff rides, because the guy was a narcissist, he was a jackass, he was incompetent. So Grant, and this is another human tendency, he didn't want to spend time with him because he was a jackass and he was incompetent. He was a narcissist.
Yeah, exactly.
So you want to spend time with people you want to spend time with.
Right.
But if you think about it from an organizational perspective, two things. That person that is in your organization that isn't performing is probably the person you need to spend more time with. Now, if you can also make the argument that
you need to fire him.
Well, yeah, you got to be, I think, the term that this guy used, and the same thing is, you've got to be ruthless on incompetence. And I was reading Matt Best's book, thank you
it's
for
my
plug.
That's a good plug.
End, he ties it all
You can buy
together.
that on Amazon at, it's $14.99, I believe, or something like that.
I actually, in the opening, he flies that mission out in Western Iraq. I flew that mission with him.
Yeah, that's what he was saying.
Yeah. So, but that was sort of, because I'm reading, I'm like, wait a minute. I remember that mission, But in the end, what I liked about the book too was he talked about there's an accountability. Yeah, being a veteran's great, but you can't just ride that. You've got to build on that, and you're still accountable.
You're still accountable. I think in a wide variety of circumstances, just because you're a veteran doesn't mean you're a good human. It doesn't mean that you're a good father or husband or a good citizen. It just means that you did something. And so when we look at the entire veteran community, there's a wide variety of people out there that have from all walks of service in life, and some of those guys are not great people.
No, it's a statistical certainty.
It is, yeah, it's a statistical certainty. It's and I think there's a lot of people out there that sometimes get it's a human condition. It's super complex.
It is.
I think there's a lot of veterans that what they need to hear is that what you need to do is elevate the perception of the term veteran and be even more driven than your civilian peers in order to elevate their image of service. Because the image of service for a huge percentage of civilians is one, they have a heroic image of service in some circumstances.
That's not always true.
Not always true. And then they also have the image of the veteran that needs like psychological help because of PTS.
TBI, all that.
Yeah, when you look at it from a statistical point of view, right? When you look at the overall service of Iraq and Afghanistan in the last 20 years, what is it? 1.5 million people, give or take. I think it was something like that. It's rotated in. We'll just call that.
Yeah, it's a pretty good size combat veteran community here.
It is.
Sure. Yeah. We were in it for quite
extended
a few
periods
years.
Of time. Yeah.
20 years, basically.
20 years. And you look at 1.5 million veterans, and you look at 10%. They say 10%, give or take, of those saw direct combat.
Yeah.
And that's actually high.
Surprised. I would say that's a little
actually high.
Yeah.
Where they're classifying direct combat as like indirect on fire bases, and which is like, I don't classify it as that. I look at direct combat as you have faced the enemy,
right,
and engaged in combat.
I would be shocked that was 1%.
I think it's more. I think you're probably more correct. I think it's 1%. It's 1% of 1.5 million, which if we look at 1.5 million and 1% of 1.5,
15,000.
Yeah. But if we look at the special operations community and the infantry and the combat arms community over the course of the last 20 years, the numbers kind of ring true, to be fair.
Yeah.
Like they kind of ring true. Now I would escalate that based on, a lot of your infantry units saw a significant amount of work.
Oh, yeah, it's depending on when you serve. Pre-surge,
correct,
surge,
yeah.
Iraq, yeah.
So the point of this entire conversation is just Crayola math for you and I to sit down and do just the numbers on it. The amount of PTS that's actually in service that's directly representing a lot of the, I would say, image of veterans. It's not statistically accurate in the sense of a lot of civilians think that veterans have anxiety and stress-related issues because of this, but you're looking at a fairly small but significant portion of the veteran community.
Yeah.
And I think that most of the veterans that are out there would feel that they're inappropriately stigmatized based on that.
Yeah.
And you have to work, and that's what I would say, going back to my conversation, is the term veteran is you have to work to elevate the term in the eyes of your subordinates, your management, your peers, your community, and elevate the term into like professionally dignified and psychologically stable, right? Versus playing directly into some form of stereotype,
right?
And propagating stereotypes. That's my own.
Well, and I don't disagree with anything there. What I would say is, what I tell guys is, and this is my observations on my own personal journey after leaving the service, right? Is that your service has resulted in you having a lot of intangible characteristics and qualities that are not commonly found, regardless of whether you saw combat or not.
Right.
That are not commonly found in the civilian world. When I got out, things that I knew as a corporal or as a buck sergeant in the Marine Corps, basic leadership stuff. Basic. I mean, things that I thought, well, I would have said 4 years ago. Well, everybody knows that. Is not true. Not true.
Not true.
All.
It's not true.
So I say, and how many times have you had somebody who's technically very good at their job, but they lack those intangible leadership things that really marginalize the skills, the technical skills they bring to the table? So a veteran, in most cases, I would say almost all, they bring to the table, when they make that transition out of uniform, they bring a lot of intangible value in leadership. Problem is, it's hard to measure that, right?
Yes.
And so, but that just means that you've got part of the solution. You've got to, like running a business, and it's profit and loss, and it's, productivity and all of the things, and supply chain, whatever it is, those are skill sets that you need to learn, the technical things. It's like me flying a new airplane, or you getting a new weapon system or whatever. But you have the important things, and many times the things that really can't be taught, right? Unless you experience them. So the key is understand what
They're difficult.
Bring. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that people recognize those on the outside. Like I've seen a lot of veterans, they rapidly, once they get into a company, climb the ladder because they have those intangible things. But that doesn't relieve you from the responsibility or requirement to learn and to understand your new environment that you're operating in, and to overcome those stigmas, right? Because I have a friend of mine who's retired as a battalion commander out of the 160th. He's a senior executive now for Bank of America. And he would tell me when he first got there, he thought the guys hired him so he could tell war stories. He said, now you got to do more about that eventually. But guys are coming, hey, what's it like in Iraq? What really happened over there? What happened in Afghanistan? I mean, they're curious. They're truly curious. But he said, but he still had to add value. Now he's like I don't know if he's a C-suite guy, if I would say, but he's close, if not. And he's still he's still riding the escalator. So I think what you've got to overcome those stigma, those stigmas that travel with you or in the minds, those misperceptions that everyone's got PTSD, everyone's damaged, right? For the good of
they're
our
all
country,
damaged goods,
right? I think you do that through your competence and your actions, and just you got to go into it understanding, hey, I've got a lot of the important parts, but I still got a long way to go to prove value to the organization. Would be my thought on that. And I think along the way you actually change perceptions about service by your own personal actions and how you present yourself and conduct yourself every day.
Oh, absolutely. 1,000%. I think it's interesting you say that because I've often thought about how if we had a corporate PLDC, how appropriate that would be. Because these are, I was reading I think it was like Extreme Ownership or Discipline is Freedom or whatever,
Jocko's book.
Where I was like, a lot of this stuff is
basic.
It's PLDC and BNOC put in corporate speak, and you're like,
well, of course.
Well, of course. Like this is, yes, of course. Seek responsibility. Okay.
Is that a novel concept? But that goes back to that earlier comment, things that you think are, use an Army verbiage, 10-level tasks, that you would expect from everyone. That's not common.
It's not common. And I think that's a wake-up call for a lot of the guys from the community because they don't feel like they can provide instant value in a lot of companies as they transition. And my response to that is, no, you can provide exponential value because you can manage and lead teams. You understand how to prioritize work. Anybody that's gone through patrol-based procedures, priorities of work, and they understand how to manage and lead people and execute on tasks, they can be project managers and plug in and drive projects across the board. They understand what is commander's intent, what is your mission, what's your mission. Like they understand this is a language. Yeah, they understand all of this language that is so important in business from my perspective. As a guy that has a few hundred veterans that work here, when I say commander's intent or when I say a 5-paragraph op order, most people know what the fuck I'm talking about. If I went to...
But this is a unique organization.
If I went to Wells Fargo, they would look at me like a hog looking at a wristwatch. They'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me.
So you put it in terms, and what I think those books, what they do is they put it in terms that make sense to civilians.
Right.
But to me, the lesson is that it's not common, right? It's not common. Leaders eat last or... putting others.
I eat first. I push everybody out of the way. Sometimes I push people down.
We'll talk about
I'm hungry.
After.
I'm hungry.
But you know what I mean? That sort of leading by example thing.
Yeah, and that's the one thing, I'm not making it about me, but the one thing like every day, like if I fail at everything else, right? On communication, on candor, and anything else, I say to myself, what can I do where my actions will speak louder than anything I might be able to say? What can I do that can lead by example? The entire project that I call Black Rifle Coffee is about leading by example.
Yes.
It's much easier to run a public or a private company than it is a public company. Much easier. You know why? Like, one of the reasons, like one of the big reasons why I wanted to do this, to take the company public, was to show the veteran community that you can start a business and in 7 years, you can grow that business from your garage being publicly traded
company.
And not because I have some, secret internal, life endeavor to have
recipe.
like a yacht Marazi helicopter combination. No, it's because the post 9/11 vet, and I'm not saying the other veterans aren't important. I'm saying that's a concentration of my effort.
Right.
Which is if I fail at other things, the one thing I can do is show them that a bunch of knuckle draggers that like to make dick jokes on the internet can do this in 7 years. Like there's a ton of guys, everybody smarter than I am. Like you guys can fucking do it. And that's where it's like, if I can do it,
and yes,
you can do it. Like out of all the mistakes and things that you've made, it's like, man, the one thing I can do is go, these are the things that I think are important. This is what I can do for the veteran community. Why don't we lead by example? So if I forget everything else, I always put that one thing. It's always in my heads up display. It's always in my heads up display.
Yeah.
It never goes away. It's like my kids or my company or whomever it is. It's like, I might like to joke around and have a good time, but at the end of the day, your actions do speak louder
than your words.
They do.
Absolutely. When people ask me what is it, because you hear guys, well, I lead from the front. I said, I don't agree with that statement. Sometimes you should lead from the front.
Sure.
Sometimes leading by example is that you're not in the front, right? Like I had a leader tell me, hey, where should you be as a leader? Well, you should be where some things you should consider. Where's your unit accepting the most risk?
Right.
Where is the preponderance unit? Or where does your boss tell you to be?
Mm-hmm.
But leadership by example, that's why it's hard, right? Because we don't always want to, sometimes we don't want to be a good example. We're in a bad mood, we're grumpy. And I think leading by example, the techniques for effectively leading by example change. It was easier to lead by example when you had 10 dudes and you had one coffee roaster.
Yeah.
It's different now when you have 700 people geographically dispersed across the United States and several states, right? So how do you continue to grow and lead by example when you face these different challenges? And you've done that clearly.
And it's funny you said that because I've heard that too. It's like leading from the front. And I'm like, well, where's the place you need to be? I'm like, a combat effective leader goes to where he is needed on the battlefield because it's a dynamic and ever-changing circumstance, and you modify your physical and your communication behavior based on where you will be the most effective. Right. So it's 360 degrees.
Yeah, you could be back at the ORP calling it, or at a position calling in fires and orchestrating all the enablers for a target. They don't need you as a rifleman.
No.
It's like I used to say, listen, they said, hey, do you fly a lot of combat missions? And I said, I do. But if the 160th needs me as a regimental commander to wiggle the sticks and fly those missions, we're in a bad place.
Right.
Right? Where am I? What does the regiment need me to do as an organization, and where am I most effective? And that's where you got to place yourself. And sometimes that's on the battlefield. Sometimes it's in a budget meeting.
Well, I do have a couple hard questions for you, like very difficult. And so I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, want to put you on the put you in the sights. I have the Afghan question, which is politically sensitive. And, I've been very open with the people on this podcast about the Afghan withdrawal, So I wanted to get that. I wanted to get to that with you, which is, how does this fail so badly? From my perspective, I think it was clearly defined. Now, did we succeed at withdrawing? Some would define that as a success.
We're out. So yeah, I think you could make that.
Mission accomplished.
On the withdrawal, clearly. Well, I don't even know that you can say that.
I don't think you can say that.
If you're saying is withdrawal military forces or withdrawal of all is withdrawal complete with all Americans? Because I would say it's not.
It's not.
Caleb, did you know with Black Rifle Coffee's Coffee Club subscription, you can get fresh coffee shipped to you every month? What? You don't even have to go to the store.
Whoa.
You don't even have to leave your bed.
What? Wow. How did you get in here? You might want to go ahead and join the Black Rifle Coffee Club subscription before one of these guys shows up at your place.
So this is a long break, but I did want to talk about the Afghan withdrawal.
Okay.
And I think a lot of us, you had some really good perspectives because you and I talked, I think, a few times over this course. I managed to team up with a group of other people. We got Freedom Flight out of Mazar. We organized with a bunch of other people on the back end.
Yeah. Five Professionals was a big part of that. Andy Wilson was helping, still helping.
Still helping. There's a lot of people still helping, and there's a lot of general officers working in the background, I think, and E9 types that are working in the background, which I was very pleasantly surprised to see. No offense to your peers, but at times I'm a bit disappointed in their leadership and some of these.
You articulated that in one of our phone calls rather clearly.
Was what the fuck is wrong?
Yeah, that was sort of what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. But I retract at least a portion of my previous statements because there's a lot of people working really hard. And my question to you is, because you spent so much time in the machine, how does that happen? Like, from your perspective, where were the failures? I don't need individual names. I'm not trying to hold anybody like.
Right.
I'm not trying to get you to point fingers. By the way, I'm just like, how does something like this happen? Because from my perspective, that was clearly definable as a failure. But that's one person's perspective, my opinion, based on a lot of different information. I would love to hear it from a person like yourself.
Well, okay. So I normally stay away from politics, so I won't. And I think both parties and both administrations own a piece of this.
Yep.
I think, setting the conditions for this to happen, and then, the current administration and the execution. No, I don't agree with a lot of the assertions that they had to do this, that they were painted in a corner by the previous administration. I don't believe that.
Right.
I believe this was a decision. It's sort of like, you got to own it. We talked about accountability and all of that. So there's two issues here. One, should we have withdrawn from Afghanistan at all? That's one issue.
Okay.
And then the other issue is, once the decision was made, the execution of that decision, right? Two separate issues.
Right.
You could have I think, a very good argument. And I could actually argue it from both sides on whether we should withdraw at all. I mean, there's a strategic perspective that having a power projection platform in Bagram would have been very good. We got the Russians to the north, the Chinese to the northeast. You got the Iranians to the west. You've got the Pakistanis to the east and the south. I mean, what better place, to have a presence, right? It's strategic deterrence.
Right.
Now, that's easy to say, but there's also a lot of, it's a landlocked country. You got to have overfly rights. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. People make the comparison, well, and we're still in South Korea, we're still in Germany. Yeah, but and I'm not saying that I disagree that there should have been a presence there. What I'm saying is there's differences, right? There's differences between South Korea, Germany, and Japan, I guess, and Afghanistan.
Right.
But so let's leave aside whether we should or should not have withdrawn. Okay, that's not. I think what we want to talk about is more the execution. Of that. So ultimately, I think that the military, they're culpable, right? They're part of it, but we're, civilian control of the military. It's part of our democracy, and I agree with that 100%. I think, at the end of the day, the chairman's job, General Milley's job, is to provide best military advice to the president and the Secretary of Defense. whether you agree with that advice or not, he did that.
Right.
Okay. And you can just go back and look at the testimony and what General McKenzie said, what Milley said. General Miller's testimony was closed, but I think they were all in line that, about some sort of presence. So my personal opinion is, let me offer I was sick to my stomach over the whole thing. And I normally will get angry about political issues, but then it passes. But this one really affected me. I felt, like we should have executed this better. Not only with the Afghans, it's through their lot in with us, that we had an obligation to take care of them because they put themselves at risk to support us. And I think we did the right thing by getting them out ultimately. But also our allies got sort of stuck, right? They had to, when we're pulling out, now they have to pull out. So my personal opinion, and this is as a retired guy from the outside looking in, and I'm not making excuses, I'm just saying my optic may be I wasn't in the room.
Right.
Is that this was executed very poorly. I think it was rushed. I'm not sure why, but normally the way it is, I think a responsible decision maker would make this decision is, okay, General Hafer, a title you've always aspired to.
Always.
My end state is I want to have zero presence, boots on the ground in Afghanistan. I want you to come back to me with a plan to make that happen. And then that's what the military does well, right? They got all these planners and they go in and they will come back with different courses of action, most dangerous, blah, 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 and then a recommended course of action on how to do that. My sense is that didn't happen. I think the discussion was we should maintain a presence there, but the decision for whatever reason was everybody out, and basically everybody out by September 1st. So I feel like that was a bad decision. I tell people all the time, you're obligated to report a decision that is illegal, unethical, or immoral. There's nothing that says that if your boss tells you to do something that's stupid, there's nothing that says that commanders can't be stupid, whether they're a commander in chief or. So, it was within his prerogative to make the decision that he made, and he made it. But I also would say you're accountable for that decision, both with the American people and, to the 13 families that lost someone because we were put into a bad situation there.
Right.
So I guess at the end of the day, this is, and I'm not being deferential. I think it was a bad decision. I think it could have been executed much better. And going back to should we or should we not pull out in total? Again, I think you could argue it both ways. But I don't understand to this day what the rush was, why it had to, because the original pullout date under the previous administration was May.
Right.
So they'd already passed that. We're talking, we're in August or July when the decision is made. So saying I was penned in by that, it doesn't make any sense. You've already slipped the timeline 6 months to the right anyway, or 4 months to the right for September. Would this have been better executed in the winter when we're outside of the fighting season, in a more planned so we can mitigate risk? And, the answer, in my opinion, as a military professional is yes. That's so, I don't think it went like it should have. And I think my personal opinion is I think we lost credibility not only with our adversaries, but with our allies as a result of this. But again, this is Clay Hutmacher's opinion. I studiously avoid, that's where I come down on it.
And I wouldn't, by no means am I going to try to make this political. It's more from the military perspective is how does that happen? Because I'm more interested in a lot of different things in the context of, so when something goes wrong, you want to know why, because you want to know how do we avoid this in the future? And I think from, it's more of, an outsider's perspective, because obviously you and I weren't there. We've talked to a lot of people, but this was, such a poorly executed withdrawal from. I think you could define it as that.
I think, justifiably so.
Right.
I don't even think that's arguable.
No.
Some people would argue that was a good withdrawal. I would not. So,
some people would, right?
Well,
I would politely disagree. I would politely disagree. And professionally, I would, and that's more of what I'm referring to is when you look at this and you look at the recommendation from, Milley and Miller and whomever else might have testified and given recommendations, and then looking at actually what took place, was there a disconnect from what you think the military recommendation for this was, and then what ultimately the commander-in-chief decided to do? Not trying to be political. I'm just saying, was there a big disconnect between that?
Well, I think that the best military advice, again, when you're the president, you're making a strategic decision.
Right.
The military perspective is one.
Mm-hmm.
There's other perspectives and there's other things to, not so much in this one. I mean, Bay of Pigs was a perfect example.
Yeah.
Military said, go in and nuke the Cubans.
Right.
In retrospect, that probably would not have been
a good
thing,
idea,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and Kennedy didn't take that advice, which it's easy when you win in the end, how history views that. But that's the president's role.
Mm.
So I don't know that there was a disconnect. I think that he made a decision that was not in line with the military advice that was provided him by the chain of command.
Mm.
But that's his prerogative to do that. And again, ultimately, I have the authority to do lots of stuff as a CEO of the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. This is within my authority. But I'm still accountable for every decision I make.
Right.
Right? So whether through it's the board, our donors, whatever. So I think he executed what he thought was the right decision. And I don't think it turned out well.
Mm.
Now, the military does a fairly good job at going after lessons learned and thinking about what we could have done better and and I say a fairly good job because we tend to relearn the same lessons over and over again.
We do, yeah.
But, it's a whole nother discussion to have about our strategy.
Well, that's a great question because from a military perspective and from an occupying force, can you build in the protection mechanism in order to safeguard your men, weapons, and equipment to include your assets? Because as an intelligence service...
What was left behind, you mean?
Correct. I'm referring to that, which is, can the military and the intelligence community, is it our responsibility to build in the appropriate mechanisms from the ground up, from the point of, we'll call it occupation, to the point of withdrawal, to make sure that if a politician, depending on political winds, decides that we're going to pull out, that we can at least safely recover the people that have directly helped us through this process? Do you think it's an ethical and tactical obligation?
Well, I think that you got to be careful about every situation's different, right? So every situation has its own set of facts and circumstances that drive a certain decision. So there's a way to do that legislatively. Like when you put in a law, a president, says we need to change a law. There's a process for that through the House and the Senate, and it's approved and then signed by the president. That's what you're getting after. Or a treaty.
Right.
A treaty now is like, there's a process. Like the previous administration withdrew from the JICPOA treaty, the treaty with Iran.
Yep.
But they had to do it in accordance with the terms of the treaty, which was 6 months notification and pull it out. I think that's the safeguard for that. I don't think you can deal in absolutes.
Got it.
The problem that a lot of people had, and I've had a lot of friends ask me about, what about the helicopters we left, the planes, the weapons? That was sold to the Afghans. That is Afghan property.
Right.
So it wasn't even our property anymore. There's an actual legal issue with that. Now, you could make in the future, you could say, well, we're going to do a conditional sale.
Right.
That if these things occur, we're taking that stuff back.
Yeah.
You're never going to do that with small arms. What are you going to have? A bunch of people running around with their shopping carts, picking up everybody's rifle, but with big pieces of equipment.
Right.
Artillery, aircraft, stuff like that. But I mean, essentially it's, like the same thing in Iraq. The defense forces in Iraq, that's their property. So you can't, that's why you just can't go take it back. I mean, it's not our property anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's lost on a lot of people. Now, I think that should be relooked and we should look at conditional sales. I don't know the legality of doing that, but that's not how we've ever done it in the past, to my knowledge.
Yeah. And I think, not that I have the answer whatsoever. It's more of a question from your perspective, because, when we looked at the SIVs, the special immigrant visas, and the process and things like that. And I think about it in two different ways because I've debated myself and I've talked to a lot of people about this, which was, when you have assets and people that have been helping you in a covert capacity for an extended period of time, the open secret is that Afghans know who the Afghans are that are working with the CIA. Now, there's a small percentage of those people that are really, obviously those assets that are very
deeply hidden,
right? Yeah. But the broad majority of them, and what I'm referring to is like openly the NDS and things like that. Yes, it's an open secret,
right?
And when you have more of the conventional military that has a process specifically for immigrant visas, I think from the special operations and the intelligence community, because a lot of this was like hand in glove. Is it our ethical obligation to protect our assets if something like this were to happen in the future? Do you think that we have a responsibility to build in courses of action to mitigate these circumstances moving forward?
100% yes.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely think it's our ethical obligation. It's a moral obligation. I think if there would have been a deliberate plan for a withdrawal, that would have been accounted for. Now, so yes, the answer is yes. I mean, we absolutely do. We're doing the right things. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety, security is one thing, but now there's another obligation, which is you're taking Afghans that a lot of them don't speak the language, and you're putting them in an entirely different culture, different laws, different customs, different language. So now that it just can't be, okay, hey, you're in, I was in a hotel in Oklahoma with a bunch of Afghans that were staying in this hotel. It can't be, okay, you're here. There has to be a process to assimilate them in our culture and teach them language. And I believe that's happening. I don't know to what extent, but I mean, it's not just getting them out. It's integrating them into a new culture, which is, I think, takes generations, frankly, but to completely get them assimilated. But that's part of it too. But I absolutely 100% agree that there is an ethical, moral obligation to take care of those that support us.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's from an accounting and auditing perspective, I think that we have to look at war from not only the war as far as like the direct gunfight or the the occupation, but it's a post-occupation, and then also the second and third order effects of these things to include what you're talking about, which is what is it going to be for our country to assimilate soldiers back into the society, to educate and retrain and put them back into the civilian population so they're living, happy and fulfilling lives.
Now, I think there is money in the budget for that. I think they are looking for money to do that. So I don't want to sell them short.
No.
I mean, I do think that's happening. I'm just saying that it can't just be, hey, drop you off at Ellis Island kind of thing. And hey, you guys are on your own kind of, it can't be that. And I think there's a general awareness that that we got, this mission is not just getting them out into friendly soil. It's to,
I think it's going to be hard.
I am to be military acronym, receive, integrate, onward movement, all those kind of things,
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard.
It's going to be horribly hard. But again, when we ask them to throw their lot in with us and put their lives and their families at risk, then okay, it's hard, but it doesn't make it less. We have less of an obligation, either ethically or morally, to do it. It's just part of the obligation.
It's part of the obligation. I think we have to work those. Americans inherently like to think about things, at least from my perspective, they like to think of it from a budget perspective as well, which I think would help people understand what the actual cost of war really is when we look at the long-term cost of war.
That concludes today's training. Any questions?